Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming to Brighton. I know lots of you have come from far and wide, and it's really great to see so many of you so engaged in the democratic process. I believe this is the last of these hustings, and I know that the candidates for one will be very relieved. But it's really, really great to have so many of you here. Quick word about me. My name's Fatima Manji, presenter, broadcaster and journalist at Channel 4 News, which I know all of you watch religiously. I have picked out some questions based on the questions that you all gave us today. So the questions I ask are very much based on your questions, not me. And I've tried to cover as many as possible according to themes. Now, the format for the event, and this is not designed by me, it's designed by the Labour Party, so if you're angry, please take it up with them. The format of the event is we will have no opening statements. We're going to go straight into the first question. The candidates have drawn lots, so they are going to go in order. Rebecca Long-Bailey is going to go first at number 1, and then we'll go down the line and split it that way. They will have 1 minute to answer the question, and we're going to be quite strict with timing so that we can get as many of your questions as possible. And after that, if there is a follow-up question, if I want to clarify something or ask them to elaborate further, they'll have a further 30 seconds to do it. At the end, they'll have a 2-minute summation statement just to end with. And just a quick reminder, we'll be breaking, and then at 2 o'clock, we're back for the Deputy Leader Hustings, so please do stay for that. So without further ado, and you can see there's loads of questions, this is not even half of them, I've split them up into themes. The first question we're going to go to is about manifesto and policy, and the question is, how would the programme and manifesto be created under your leadership? Rebecca.
Well, we've had huge strides forward in democratising our party in recent years, but we've not gone far enough in terms of empowering our members in the policy-making process. And that's why I think it's so important that myself or whoever else that wins this leadership campaign make sure that we're empowering our members to make policy in their constituency meetings and not just once a year at conference. And that requires political and economic education, because our members are our greatest asset. They have the best ideas, and I know that from when we did our Green Industrial Revolution tour around the country, where we brought trade unionists, businesses and members together who formulated ideas that would transform their communities, bring industries and businesses to those areas and create the jobs of the future, as well as tackling climate change. But that doesn't happen by accident. That involves empowering our members, and that's one of the critical things that I'll do as Labour leader.
Thank you.
I would involve all of our members and our trade unions and our affiliates and have a very, very open process. The best ideas in our party come when we take them from everybody within the party. So we need an open process. I was part of the policy process in the last 2 or 3 years. I think we can improve on that and make it even bigger. I think we need to involve our regions as well, and also Wales and Scotland specifically. So we need a mechanism that draws in those areas. I think timing is really, really important. One of the things I think about the manifesto that we just had in December is a lot of the ideas appeared to land late for a lot of people. It would have been much better, I think, if some of that had been out there months or even years beforehand, so that we had a better chance to make the argument. So I would do this, I would actually start pretty well straight away. The manifesto has to be one that speaks to the 2020s, the 2030s, it's got to be forward-looking. But remember, we've got local elections coming up, mayoral elections coming up in May, and then Scotland and Wales have got elections next year. So we do need to look at the manifesto for probably 2024, but there's quite a lot of work to do before then. So maximum involvement, make sure we do it as early as we can, get those ideas out there, because we've got to take the public with us. And I think landing it just in the last few weeks didn't really work in the last general election.
Thank you. And Lisa.
Well, in the run-up to 2015, I went around the country helping Ed Miliband to put together the Youth Manifesto. And we'd started with a view that it would be all about tuition fees. And actually what we found when we got out into the country and asked young people themselves was that abolishing the youth rate of the minimum wage was the thing that they most wanted us to do as a top priority. So I think we've got to become, again, a party that is driven from our grassroots. I want to see us empowered at local level to deliver real change with communities, to run credit unions, to run food banks and law centres and childcare facilities, so that we can then use those experiences to drive that change. I want to see regional conference become the place where policy is made, because if we're honest, how many members actually ever get to national conference where policy is often carved up behind closed doors in a small room? And I want to see us get out into the country and deliver that together. In the last few years, we've been split apart as a party as well as a country over issues like Brexit. I want to see us bring in new tools like citizens' assemblies within the party and outside to bring people together and to create that real change that lasts.
Thank you very much. Just a quick word to the audience. I know you applauded all of them and you really love them, but please try and keep it to a minimum so we can get as many questions in as possible. Just a quick follow-up to all of you on this one, and 30 seconds on this, please. In terms of the 2019 manifesto, which one specific policy area or policy in the manifesto would you ditch? Becky?
Well, I think that the manifesto that we had was one of the most transformational manifestos that we've had in a generation. And we had many of the right answers to the right issues that many of our communities are facing right across the United Kingdom. And what I wouldn't want us to see was to scale back our ambition, because that's what the Tories want us to do. Now, that's not to say that we didn't get things wrong in this election campaign, because we did. We didn't have an overarching narrative that spoke to people's aspirations and convinced them that the Labour Party is the party of bettering the quality of your life, whatever your income, wherever you live. And we did put out too many policies in the election campaign. It was as if we were putting 2 or 3 out every single day, which was very confusing, instead of focusing on key ones that we knew would resonate.
Okay, thank you. Keir?
There was lots of good stuff in that manifesto. I think in the end it just felt overloaded. And there was too much in there, and certainly I was in 44 constituencies with campaigning teams. The feedback was that the public didn't believe we could deliver all of it, and therefore none of it mattered because they didn't believe it. And I think that was a central problem. In terms of going forward, obviously we've got to look at what would go in a 2024 manifesto rather than having an argument about what we'd keep from the 2019 manifesto. And some of the pledges will have to change because we've just lost 5 years. There's a cost when you lose an election, and that's you lose 5 years' worth of a chance to implement things. So I would keep it much more focused. I don't think it should lose the radical edge that it had, either this one or 2017, but it needs to be ready for 2024 to speak to the public then.
Thank you. Lisa?
Well, if I'm honest, I think that by the time we got to the election and the publication of the manifesto, I think people had already stopped listening. And I don't think this was a rejection of the manifesto. I think this was a rejection of the years before, where we'd been fighting each other, where we'd seemed more interested in each other than the country. And actually far longer back than that, for about 20 years in coalfield towns like mine, where people have just felt that we've become very disconnected from people's lives, that we don't have the resources that we need at local level to be with people, delivering real change on the ground rather than just turning up at election time. But I believe in the policies in that manifesto. I think this country needs real, radical, fundamental change. And I don't think we can go out in 4 years' time, after everything the Tories have done to Britain and compromise on that. People need and want to see us rebuild the fabric of modern Britain, and we have to go out and fight for it.
Thank you very much. The next theme of questions is around campaign funding. We had lots on that. Candidate 2 is going to begin answering that. This question comes from Barnaby in Hove, who asks, should leadership candidates of the Labour Party accept donations from corporations and rich individuals? Keir?
Well, I think it's very, very important that all the candidates publish all of the donations that they get wherever they come from. That's a matter of principle, it's about transparency, and it's about accountability. It's also, by the way, the rules the Labour Party have put in place for all of us and all the deputy leadership candidates, and they did it for the last competitions. I've had funding from trade unions. I've got the backing of 5 trade unions, crowdfunding, and from individual donors. I've got a compliance team that looks at that, makes sure they're all proper in accordance with our policy. They then have to be published. They go to the parliamentary authorities who check they're in the right form. My first batch was put up a few weeks ago. The next batch is with the parliamentary authorities and is going up, I think, on Monday of next week.
Thank you. Lisa.
So I've published everything that I've brought in as and when we've raised it over the course of this campaign. The good news for me is there isn't a lot of it, so we haven't had to declare very much. I'm very proud to have the backing of the GMB and the NUM, and I'm really proud that we've managed to raise a lot of the very small amount of money that we've got through crowdfunding. If anyone wants to donate, I can give you the details later. I don't like the reliance on corporate funding, if I'm honest. I think we need a different settlement in this country. I think it feeds the sense for political parties and for candidates that we're all in it together, that we're in the pockets of other people. I'm proud to be funded in part by the GMB, but I would fight for the GMB and for the policies that they represent anyway, and I don't want people to think that I'm doing that because I'm taking money from them. But I just finally say this, it really matters to me that the money that we take is in line with my ethics and my values and with the Labour Party's ethics and values, and we've been really tough on that. When I was at the Children's Society, I led a campaign against our own trustees to force them to give a donation back to Bright House, an appalling company that was ruining the lives of the families that we represented. And I will never take money from people who aren't in line with my values.
And Becky.
I think big corporate money in politics stinks. And it stinks because only recently we saw Boris Johnson not able to go and visit flood areas or convene a Cobra meeting, but he found time for a Tory ball where he sold off a game of tennis. He was willing to sell his backhanders for backhanders in return. And my mum has always said, you don't get nothing for nothing. These people always want to be repaid at some point in the future, and that will mean compromising on our values. So I've been proud to publish my donors in this leadership election. I'm proud that it's trade union members and Labour Party members who funded my campaign, and we've all got to stand up to make sure that we get this big money out of politics because it's undermining everything that we're trying to do.
Thank you very much. Our next theme of questions is around party unity and discipline. There's lots of questions about division in this leadership race too, something that you've touched on already. Let's take this question from Andy in Brighton, who says, given that we should be attacking the Tories and not each other, why do you think some Labour MPs are so comfortable attacking the current leader? Starting with Lisa, please.
Well, look, I've never liked the red-on-red war that we've seen, not just in the last 4 years, but actually we've seen in this party over decades. I think the only people it helps is the Tories, and I've always tried to pull together as a team. And when we started this contest, I spoke to the other candidates, and this is not me making a point about me. They were more than willing and receptive to have a chat and to see how together we could model this differently. And I hope that what you've seen over the course of this campaign is 3 people who are determined to do this differently so that the next leader of the Labour Party comes out strengthened by this process and in the best possible position to take the fight to the Tories. But let me say this too, is that I left the shadow cabinet because there was a factional war being waged on the backbenches and there was a factional war being waged from the leader's office. I will not accept that. And the Labour Party that I lead will do this differently. Great reforming Labour governments have always been led, not by individuals, but by broad, strong teams that come from every tradition in our party. That is the way that we win, and that is the Labour Party that I believe in.
Thank you. Becky.
We can't go through another 4 years like we've just been through. It's as simple as that. And I honestly believe in 2017, we'd have won that general election if we'd have been a united party. Because when the public see Labour members on the media smearing and briefing against each other, when they see Labour members fighting against each other, on the one hand, some being called a cult, and the other hand, the others being called Tories, it makes them lose faith in our ability to deliver as a government, because disunited parties don't win. Now, we are a broad church. We've always had groups in the party pushing different policy agendas, and that's a good thing. It shows how diverse we are and how capable we are of appealing to every single person here in the United Kingdom. But whoever the leader is after this election campaign, we all get behind them. We don't have our fights in public, we do it behind closed doors, and we remember who the real enemy is. It's the Conservative Party.
Thank you. So there's a follow-up question here in 30 seconds.
Shall I answer?
Oh, so sorry. It was all going so well. Here's Dharma.
Sorry about that. Look, there's an old saying, isn't it, that divided parties don't win elections, and it's an old saying because it's true. So we've got to unite as a party. We're 580,000 members. We should celebrate that. We're the biggest political party in Europe. What strength and passion we have as a party. We've got to stop asking the question, which bit of the party are you from, and start asking the question, what are you saying? I think and I hope that the way the three of us have modelled this leadership contest bodes really well for the future, because we haven't been up here taking lumps out of each other. We've been putting forward a constructive case. And that's the campaign I've tried to run as well, a positive, constructive campaign. And I too, whoever wins this, the three of us are here before you, it's your decision. Whoever wins this, I will get 100% behind and support in whatever they want to do, taking our party forward.
Thank you very much. A follow-up question, 30 seconds each, please. How would you specifically prevent a repeat of the PLP working in opposition to the leader elected by the membership, whoever it may be? Starting with Lisa, please.
Well, I think that you've got to bring people in, and one of the problems with the last few years, I think, is that I thought in 2015, I felt a moment of profound relief when I heard that phrase, kinder, gentler politics, because the PLP I was elected into in 2010 was not a nice place to be. If you were on the left, you found yourself on the back benches, out without a hope, without any hope of even being on a select committee, let alone the front bench. I thought that that would change. It didn't. I've had enough of one faction dominating and the other being pushed out. You've got to bring people in, and you've got to realise that the reach that we have into the country is because of the breadth of our movement.
Thank
And
you.
we've got to do this differently, and we've got to support people, and we've got to model that behaviour at every level of the party, including at local council level, where behaviour is sometimes not good enough, and we've got to get this right.
Okay. Becky.
Firstly, I hope that many of our members understand the damage that the disunity that we've had over the last 4 years has caused. But I will operate an open door policy as Labour leader. I'll want members of our PLP to come and talk to me when they're not happy with things that I've said, when they want to change policy position, and we have those constructive discussions in private. But I won't stand by and see a repeat of what's happened over the last 4 years. If I see members briefing against other members, it's not acceptable, and it undermines our members. If we expect you to go out campaigning, rain, snow, wind, we expect our Labour MPs to support you every step of the way in doing that. And that means backing our elected leader.
Thank you. If we're going to get past this, we've got to stop looking at it and going backwards. The more we look back and say, who did this, who did that, the more difficult we make it to go forwards. Of course I want the PLP to be united behind whoever is the leader of our party. I think we need to close the gap between the leader and the PLP. I want a very, very strong front bench, whichever of us is leader, because I want powerful advocates for our party out there, not just in Parliament, but on the radio, on the television. I'd also like to make sure our backbenchers feel much more involved. There's a lot of expertise there. It shouldn't just be the front bench that makes policy. I think backbenchers have a lot to offer on policy and campaigning, so I'd like to close that gap, but I'm looking distinctively forward here rather than picking over the old arguments about who did what, because we can pick them over forever, and it probably just makes it worse.
You.
We've got to unite, and that means going forwards.
Great, thank you. Our next theme of questions is about PR and electoral reform. And we're going to take this question from Steve and Lewis, who says, do you support proportional representation, and would you be willing to join in a coalition to defeat the Tories? And Becky's going to start this one.
Well, firstly, on a coalition, I think we should all be working towards securing a Labour majority based on our values. Now, of course, we should work in opposition. We're in a very difficult position at the moment. We've got to face up to the huge challenges our communities face, all the way through from climate change to social care. And that means working on a cross-party basis where we share common goals and we try to pressure the government. But we should never walk away from our own principles and our own policies, and I'm very strong about that. On proportional representation, I think it's very interesting to look at how many votes it took to elect a Conservative MP in this election compared to how many votes it took to elect a Labour MP, and there's no comparison. But there's a number of issues that we do need to discuss, and we should have this discussion within the party, is that proportional representation or a proportional voting system sometimes loses that connection with constituency. And certainly in many of the areas that we lost in this election, we need to have an MP that's rooted in the community and accountable to those who vote for them. I mean, I'm sure we can find ways of addressing that in proportional voting, but I think as a first step, we should abolish the House of Lords and replace it with an elected Senate outside of London, where we can use proportional voting to elect our representatives.
Thank you. Keir.
I think the system we've got where millions of people, particularly in safe seats, feel that their vote doesn't really count, needs to be looked at, because that's very disempowering of people. So I'd be up for that discussion and very open to it. I do agree that whatever the system is, there needs to be one representative, one member of parliament, if you like, for a geographical area. You might top up that, but I feel very strongly that everybody who lives in my constituency ought to be able to come to see me with whatever problem they've got, and it should be my duty solemnly to help them, whatever they voted. And that's a really, for all of us, this will be the same, very, very important part of what we do, and so I wouldn't want to lose that in the system. I think if we're going to change on PR or anything else, let's not just look at the House of Commons, let's look more broadly, the House of Lords, of course, but actually how do we get power out of Whitehall and Westminster and closer to people in the first place? So how you vote for your local authority and what power they've got is just as relevant in all of this. On the second part of the question, which was, I think, about coalitions and cross-party working, we've achieved a lot in cross-party working in opposition to the Tories. We did a lot of work on Brexit as one of the big ticket items. Caroline Harris, of course, ran a cross-party campaign about child funerals and the cost of child funerals. And because Tories backed that, she's now successfully got rid of costs for child funerals.
Thank you.
Where we can join to take on the Tories, we should do it. And we're going to have to do that over the next 4 years.
Thank you. Please, sir.
I think first past the post is a real problem because it stops us from cooperating with other progressives. And I literally wrote a book about this with Caroline Lucas a few years ago about how we might cooperate better together. Because I learned when I worked with child refugees in Yarlswood that people cannot wait for change. And when I speak to my constituents who are dealing with the impact of social care and our lack of thought and planning about how to deal with an older population, when I look at the crisis of climate change, I just think we've got to reach across the divide and work with whoever it takes in order to make change now. But there is no substitute for winning the argument, and I learnt that during the EU referendum, when every vote counted and when a lot of people in my Coalfield constituency came out to vote, but they came out to vote as lifelong Labour members and socialists on the other side of the argument from us about international cooperation and about working with our EU friends and allies. So we've got to be out there and we've got to win the argument. And we should never let other political parties tell us that we don't have the right answers to this. We are the party that gave this country the world's first Climate Change Act and put us on the path to climate safety. So when we work with the Greens, we should remind the country that we have a proud legacy of this and we will fight to defend it.
Thank you. So a follow-up question linked to this, 30-second answers, please. As we live in a representative democracy, are there any circumstances that you consider national referenda as appropriate? Becky?
I think if the discussion ever becomes, part of policy making in the next few years on another EU referendum, I'll be honest, I know how strongly many people within the party feel about our relationship with the European Union, and we've got a duty to look over the government's shoulder and make sure that the trade deal that they secure doesn't undermine environmental protection, workers' rights, and make sure that we have that strong relationship going forward. But I think it would be an absolute disaster for us to confirm that in 2024 we would advocate for another referendum on the European Union. We saw what that did to many of our communities. In this general election, it undermined trust within the party. And although we were trying to do the right thing, bringing together those who voted Leave and those who voted Remain, it didn't work, and it took so many other issues down with it, unfortunately.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think there's a huge problem with referenda because you get one big question below which there's thousands of questions that aren't answered by it. The referendum on the EU was a classic example of that. One question, do you want to be in or out? If you want to be out, then there's loads of questions that follow on from that, for which you've got no guidance from the referendum. So I don't think they're helpful. I think in the end they're divisive. They don't really answer questions, and we're better off avoiding them and doing politics in the better way through Parliament, through our local authorities, through Scotland, through Wales, etc. Because in the end, I think these big questions, it sounds like they're going to answer a big question, you're going to get a decisive answer. You don't really get it, you don't answer the questions underneath, and we've been divided for 3.5 years, and I think whichever side we're on, I don't think anybody has enjoyed that division in their own family, their community, their party, or across the country. And the sooner we can heal that, the better.
Okay.
We're not going to heal it by splitting it open again very quickly.
Thank you. And Lisa.
Well, I think I'm like a lot of people in this country. I'm sick to death of referendums. I don't think I ever want to see another one, if I'm honest. I didn't want the Indie ref in Scotland. I didn't vote for the EU referendum the first time round. I just think we found so many ways to divide ourselves from each other. And these blunt instruments take democracy as if might is right and two sides can fight it out where one wins and the other is crushed. There is no future for us in that sort of country. That's why I say that if we want representative democracy to survive, and I do, we've got to find far better ways of bringing people in and bringing people together through citizens' assemblies and through pushing power out of Whitehall and Westminster to our towns and our cities and most of all to our communities so that people can come together and make those decisions together at the level where it matters and where it counts.
Thank you. On to our next theme, and lots of you wanted to talk about winning elections. Starting with Keir Starmer on this one, what is the single most important thing you as leader can do to ensure Labour return to power, and how will you achieve this? The single most important thing, and that comes from Emily in Reading West. Keir.
Unite our party. We need to bring our party together. If we don't stop taking lumps out of each other, if we don't stop being factional, we're not going to win the next general election. And we can argue all day long about why we lost the last general election. There are a number of reasons. Anybody who went campaigning knows what they were. But in the end, we lost the trust of the British people in our party as a party of change and a party that they could trust. And we didn't just lose one election, we lost 4 in a row. So we've got to unite. We've got to come together as a fighting force. We're unstoppable as a fighting force when we do come together. We need to be a completely effective opposition once we're united, because Johnson is getting away with things now he shouldn't be. He's absent for the big decisions. He's a dangerous man. He's no clown. So we've got to be effective in opposition, and we need to be unrelentingly focused on winning that next general election.
Thank you. And Lisa Nandy.
I think the major problem that we've had is complete and utter collapse of trust in Labour and in the political system as a whole to deliver on the change that people need in their lives. And I feel that everywhere I go in the country. So I'll start by being honest about the fact that we need to bring our party back together and look outwards to the country and start dealing with what has just happened, the worst election defeat since 1935, where nurses and ex-miners weren't just turning away from Labour, they were turning to the Tories in the hundreds of thousands in towns that have returned Labour MPs for 100 years. Now, we've got to have an honest reckoning about why. This is 40 years in the making, where good jobs have been lost from those areas, where young people have had no choice but to leave, and where older people are growing old hundreds of miles away from children and grandchildren, and in the cities where those young people move to, where high housing prices and debt and air pollution and congestion are now the norm. We have got to be the party that goes out, that acknowledges this, with a real plan of how to fix it, and shows people that they can believe in politics that will transform their lives again.
Thank you very much.
Look, it was the 120th birthday of the Labour Party this week. And I'll ask our members this question. Do we just want to win? Because if that's the case, we might as well join the Conservative Party. Or do we remember why the Labour Party was created in the first place? To realise the aspirations of every single person in this country and to win with that argument. And we only do that by having a vision. We did that in 45 by rebuilding Britain after the war and creating the NHS. We did that under Harold Wilson, showing people the white heat of technology and the jobs of the future. And in 1997 we did it with education and aspiration. And we can do it again with a green industrial revolution, a mass house building programme that includes majority council house building. We can do it with investing in our public services and stopping privatisation. And we do it by investing in education. So no matter where you're from, whoever you are, we can guarantee that your children's lives will always be better than your own. And that's something that we've lost that hope in the last 10 years. And the Labour Party should always be there to bring that hope back.
Thank you. Okay. Quick follow-up question. It is a difficult question, the audience member says, but please do keep it to 30 seconds. How will you win over a not particularly left-wing country and satisfy a quite left-wing party? We can't hear you. Okay, sorry. How will you win over a not particularly left-wing country and satisfy a quite left-wing party? Okay? Good. Okay, Keir.
Well, the task we've got, whichever of us emerges out of this, is to retain the Labour votes we've got, to win back the Labour votes we've lost, and then to go further, which is to win votes of people who traditionally vote for other parties. That's the coalition that we've got to bring together. Now, I don't think this is such a difficult question, because I genuinely think that that last election, after 10 years of Tory rule, most people wanted change, desperately wanted change. When they see homelessness, look at that here in Brighton, when they know that mental health assessments for 8-year-olds take 18 months, when they know that 9 out of every 30 children in school classes is living in poverty, they desperately want change. So I don't think it's so difficult. We need to have the trust of the public to deliver that change. But I think people in their hearts know that this inequality has gone far, far too far. They want it to change. So I think we can bring people together around that, but we do have to reach all those three parts.
Thank you. Lisa.
I think we're a cautious country, but we're also a thoroughly decent country. And because of that, Labour, as a radical revolutionary party, has always had to meet a higher bar. And that's why I say that you have to go out and you have to win the argument, especially where it's hard. That's why I did my first interview of this campaign with Andrew Neil, because unlike Boris Johnson, I'm not scared of Andrew Neil, and under my leadership, Labour never will be. We are a better country than the Tories would have us believe. We are decent, we look after ourselves, we look after each other, we are compassionate towards refugees. I believe in that country, I know that country, and I am determined that we will go out and fight for it.
Thank you.
Do you know, sometimes we get so lost in the details of policy development that we forget the very essence of human nature. What is it that every single person in our communities wants, whether they're rich or poor? They want a decent standard of life. And we need to offer the policies that will deliver that, all the way through from an industrial strategy, through to public investment, through to reform of the financial system. And we do that by explaining that these policies, they're not actually radical. I'll let you into a little secret. Much of the things that we offered in the last general election, they weren't out there, they weren't left-wing. They were policies that had been brought into force by many European countries to deliver that decent quality of life. And if it's good enough for our European neighbours, it's good enough for people here in this country.
Thank you. Okay, on to our next theme. It's not entirely unrelated, and Lisa's going to start with this one. Lots of people asking about how Labour can win back Leave seats while building support in Remain seats, as it were. Question from Gary from Hove CLP. How will you reconcile the voting divide which was observed at the recent general election between the young, graduate-based metropolitan cities and the working-class communities that surround them? Lisa.
So I spent the last 5 years investigating this. I went and set up something called Centre for Towns after the referendum because I was so fed up with hearing that the towns that voted Leave in the north, the south, the Midlands and North Wales were somehow left behind wastelands where people had so little left to lose that they decided to vote to leave the EU. I was fed up with hearing that my constituents were stupid or racist or xenophobic in a town where we've always understood the value of international cooperation with international industry based in many of those areas, and we've always gone out and fought off the far right every single time they've tried to get a foothold in our areas. We saw Tommy Robinson off last year in Wigan, and we'll see him off again when he tries to come back. So I reject the idea that we are not a better country than the Tories would have us believe, and I am going to give voice to that country. And to do that, we need to address an economic settlement that has seen jobs disappear in one part of our economy and overheated house prices and jobs and employment prospects in another. I want to see an economy built that works for every part of this country. That's how we deliver on the hopes and ambitions of people in all of those communities, and we stand up for the better country we are.
Thank you. Becky.
I think it's about understanding that we don't divide communities. Poverty in Brixton is exactly the same as poverty in Blythe. We know that our economy is fundamentally broken. We know that we've got the worst regional inequality in the whole of Europe, with large numbers of our children living in poverty who are in working households. We know that work insecurity is rife, whether it's in cities or whether it's in towns or villages, to the extent where you hear stories of delivery drivers having to pee in bottles because they're so frightened of taking a break. We appeal to our voters in all of these areas by offering the answer to these ills, by setting out a robust industrial strategy to reindustrialise areas that have been neglected for over 40 years. We offer security at work with strong trade union representation, banning zero-hour contracts and making sure that every single person has the right to decent pay and security. And we empower our members to be our cheerleaders in our communities, becoming part of the social fabric, speaking in workplaces, pubs and community spaces, so people understand that the Labour Party is about realising people's aspirations, wherever you're from.
And Keir.
We need to listen and we need to connect and we need to engage, whether that's in towns or whether that's in cities. Because I live in a town in North London, particularly because I voted Remain and my constituency did, I spent a lot of the last 3.5 years in places that voted Leave and in particular in towns across the country, because I thought it was very important for me to have those conversations, not stand before you now saying what I'm going to do. I've actually, in my brief, been doing this. In the towns, what I've listened to, what I've heard, I've had some rough conversations, of course, but when I've said, what are the 3 things you want me to think about on the train on the way home, almost always what comes through is we want better infrastructure and transport. It's just not good enough. We want jobs with real security and dignity, because we haven't got that. Or we want decisions about us made by us and closer to us. That seems pretty compelling to me. When I get back to London, what I see, and in our cities, is lots of poverty. There's a massive working class in our cities, and we must never forget that. So the issues that are common to us, low pay, insecure work, the need for better schools, education, health, etc., that's there, common for all, but listen and engage. And when we do, it's a compelling story about change that I think takes us a long way forward.
Thank you very much. On to our next question, and lots of members expressed concern about this. How do you plan to combat press bias, and thinking specifically about the right-wing media and vitriol that may be thrown at the Labour leader? Starting with Becky, please, 1 minute.
Well, look, I think we need to be honest with ourselves that there is no leader of the Labour Party who is going to be acceptable to those who want to destroy the Labour Party. And we've also got to be honest that over the last 4 years, we've seen smears, we've seen Jeremy Corbyn's character gradually chipped away over time, to the extent that many of us, when we were knocking on doors, We were hearing the smears, and no amount of trying to convince those voters that Jeremy was the kind, decent person that he is would convince them otherwise. So we have to be more ruthless. We need to have a rebuttal unit within our party that fights back against those smears immediately, because we know that a lie travels around the world faster than the truth has time to put its shoes on, and we need to recognise that. We also need to have a digital campaigning team that's increased far beyond its current capacity so that we go toe-to-toe with the likes of Dominic Cummings, because we were nowhere near in this election campaign. They were targeting demographics, your hobbies, your income groups. And we were just putting out nice memes and videos, and that's not good enough. We have got to be ruthless forensic, and we've got to fight back.
Thank you. Here.
Jeremy Corbyn was vilified by the press, not just going into the general election, but for the whole time that he was leader of the Labour Party. And it was done with malice and with intent. And the intent was to stop an incoming Labour government in 2017 and then in 2019. There's no doubt about that. When we knocked on doors, the number one issue was the leadership of the Labour Party, and very often, as Becky said, what was actually coming back to us was what had been fed in by the media. So that was their purpose, that was their intent, and to some extent they succeeded in it. Every Labour leader has had it. I actually think Jeremy probably got it worse than any previous Labour leader. Makes you wonder why we're putting ourselves forward, by the way. We have got to do something to diversify the press, because this is with a purpose. The purpose is to stop radical Labour governments coming in to power, and therefore we need to have that as a central part of what we do when we do come into power. The problem we've got, in a way, is because we've lost the election, we've lost the chance to do something about it, and Johnson isn't going to change this. He's actually going to make it worse, because part of his approach, and it's Cummings' approach, is now to attack independent journalism and to try to push us down an American model that will make it 10 times worse. This is a culture war that's very, very important. So we diversify the press, we call out the vilification, but we stand up for independent journalism and a free press, because otherwise Johnson and Cummings will take us down an American model and it'll be 10 times worse by the time we get to the next election.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's your answer.
And answer.
I mean, I think Jeremy probably had it worse than any leader that I can think of. But before there was Jeremy, there was Ed, there was Gordon, there was Attlee, there was Wilson. No Labour leader has ever got away with this. And at the beginning of this contest, there was some stupid article that criticised Becky's shoes. I've had this sort of rubbish as a woman in politics, and I went out and she's got very nice shoes, by the way, and I went out and said, this is just absolute nonsense. We've got to speak up and stand up against this rubbish. It's designed to belittle us. It's designed to divide us. We've got to speak up for our legacy over the last 4 years and what we got right as well as what we got wrong, and we've got to speak up for our time in government, because if we don't defend it, nobody else will. I said in this contest that I wanted to see a social media tax so that we could fund local papers better, because the demise of local papers, which are trusted, has left a real gap in our democratic system. And I want to see us mutualise the BBC, not because I hate the BBC, but because I believe in the licence fee, and I believe it must be far more accountable to the public and to the people who fund the BBC, and far less open to manipulation from this right-wing Tory government. Let's stand up for the press we believe in.
Looking at the shoes now, I can see everyone going, what's wrong with those shoes? They're just black shoes. I'll show you later.
Right, on to our next question. And Karina from Mole Valley is asking about disability rights. Other members were also asking about this. She says, so many disabled people face barriers to inclusion in the party and discrimination. So what would you do to change that in the party? Starting with Keir, please.
I'm really glad this has come up, because I don't think we discussed this enough. It's come up a few times in the Hustings, but not enough. I think the whole approach to disability has to change. And I say that as a son of my mum, who was very disabled all of her life, and therefore know firsthand what this feels like. We often think that what we should do is allow or enable disabled people to thrive rather than survive. So we need to change the whole culture. I think in our party we could do much, much more. In about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Disability Labour and I had a Zoom call where they were able to quiz me. And it was fantastic because people from across the country can come in and have a virtual meeting. And I've said to our party, why don't we have this for all of our meetings? Why should you have to be physically in the room to participate? And it's not the same to... And it's all very well saying, well, you know, you can have a remote vote, a postal vote or something. You want to influence the debate. You want to be part of the debate. And I think we've got to be really radical about this and open it up. Why can't we have virtual meetings where people, you know, whatever their disability, can actually participate, influence the debate and be part of the outcome?
Thank you.
I think we've got this completely the wrong way round. When I worked at the Children's Society with children with disabilities, quite often what we were battling was a culture that said that they needed to adapt to society, rather than questioning how we've built a society that doesn't automatically include the widest range of people. And I think if we're honest, we haven't got this right in the Labour Party at all. I have a friend who stood as a parliamentary candidate. She's in a wheelchair, and when she asked the party to adapt the campaign headquarters, they said that there was no money to do it. It meant she couldn't go to the toilet in her own campaign centre for the duration of the campaign. This is simply not good enough. So we need to make sure that we've got the resources right. We need to make sure that we've got far better representation at every level of our party, because this is really about people being able to make a contribution. And that's what gives us the right to go out and fight against the Tories and to say things like the work capability assessment and the universal credit system are an absolute disgrace, because they dehumanise and devalue people, and we should scrap it and let the people who use that system and rely on that system redesign it so that it works for them, not so that they can have a safety net, but so that they can be empowered to make the contribution to this country that they can and we need them to make in the future.
Becky.
So we do need to make our constituency and branch meetings far more inclusive. And I did the online Zoom call as well that Kia did, and I thought that was a fantastic way to bring all members, not just our disabled members, into our constituency meetings without having to leave the comfort of their own home. I think there needs to be a recognition of representative places on CLP executives, that we make sure we always have a disabled representative and we give them the respect that they deserve. We need a bursary system within the party to encourage disabled people to go into elected positions of office and recognise the difficulties that they face in becoming a councillor or an MP. But ultimately, we've got to speak loudly on policy issues. I'll read you out a list of names. Errol Graham, starved to death after the DWP stopped his benefits. Jodie Whiting, suicide after failing to attend a fit for work test. Stephen Smith died after being denied benefits even though he had multiple illnesses. We have a degrading, dehumanising, immoral system that undermines the respect of all people within our communities who deserve support and recognition. So we need to have an independent living service and a security system built on respect and independent living.
Thank you. Some quite specific pledges there, so you can hold them to that. OK, on to a question about Scottish independence. Lisa's going to start with this one. What are the candidates' views on a further Scottish independence referendum, and how do you propose to recover the party's position in Scotland?
OK, so the SNP said at the time that this was a once-in-a-generation referendum. And I think we have to hold them to that, because we've found so many ways in recent years to divide ourselves from each other. And I believe in the United Kingdom. And when I went to meet ex-Labour voters in Scotland during this campaign, they told me loud and clear that they want to see a party that stands up for the United Kingdom, because working people in Wigan have more in common with working people in Glasgow than they do with bankers in the City of London, and they always will. So I'm going to go out and fight for the United Kingdom, but that means we need to recognise that people in Scotland, as in many other parts of the United Kingdom, need far more power much closer to home. Federalism won't cut it. It has to be devolved to a local level, because if we're honest, in Aberdeenshire, Holyrood often feels as remote as Westminster, and we've got to start addressing this. And finally, the Labour Party I lead will stand up for Scotland and Scotland's interests. When Donald Trump is attacking one of our crown jewel industries, the Scotch whisky industry. And Boris Johnson has gone missing by slapping huge tariffs on that industry. I will stand up at the dispatch box and I will challenge that, and I will show people in Scotland that being part of UK Labour matters, and that is the difference that will make.
Thanks. Becky.
We won't win a general election without support in Scotland, and we have to understand that what happened in this election didn't just happen like that. Our support in Scotland had been declining over many years. We've got to understand what's pushed people into the arms of the SNP. And when we went through the last independence referendum, we campaigned with the Conservative Party on a platform called Better Together. And that made us look like we were part of the establishment that many people were angry with, and the SNP were the anti-establishment party. And we can't make that mistake again. Now, if the case arises that the Scottish Parliament want another independence referendum, I don't think as a democratic party we can stand in the way of that. Although I think we campaign vigorously for Scotland to remain part of the United Kingdom on our own terms, not on the terms of the Conservative Party. I also think we need to do more to support our Scottish colleagues on matters such as industrial strategy, to outline the failings of the SNP, to outline that wind farms off the coast of Scotland aren't being made in yards in Scotland. They're being made in Indonesia and shipped back one at a time.
Thank you.
That's not supporting a Scottish industrial strategy, let alone a United Kingdom-based one.
Okay. Thank you.
We won't have a majority Labour government if we don't win in Scotland. And therefore, this is an absolute must. And the scale of task is huge. In 2015, as you know, catastrophic losses in Scotland, many, many seats falling. In 2017, we then went from 1 MP back to 7, step in the right direction, and we had 20 seats, which were within 2,500 votes of being won. So we should have returned 25 or even 30 MPs in this election, and we've slid all the way back to 1. So there's a huge task to do, and of course Scotland have got elections next year in 2021. So whoever's the leader of the Labour Party has got just 12 months or so to really work with Scottish Labour on this. What I would do as leader of the party is work with Scottish Labour, not imposing things from London on Scottish Labour, but being there with Scottish Labour, working through how we're going to take on the next 12 months. We need to focus on the social justice or social injustice in Scotland and try not to get dragged all the time in the constitutional debate, because that masks the real issues that are going on in Scotland. I think we got trapped by either arguing for the status quo in terms of the constitution or independence. I think tearing the United Kingdom apart, putting in more barriers and more borders is the wrong way forward. So before we get into 21 and going into 21, we've got to make a strong case, radical devolution, a federal system, take them on social justice and rebuild in Scotland.
Thank you. Okay, next question, and we're going across the Atlantic for this one. Who are you supporting in the Democrat primaries and why? That's from Kitty in Brighton, and we're going to start with Becky.
Bernie Sanders. Because I think he's trying to do what we should be doing in the Labour Party. It's explaining that our economic policies are not actually radical. They're common sense to every single person who wants to have a better quality of life.
Thank you. Keir.
ABC, anybody but Trump. We've got to defeat this man. What he is doing, not just in America, but across the world, is damaging. This America First approach, getting rid of multilateral approaches to world problems. This is serious stuff. And taking the whole world to the right. So he has to be beaten. I actually think Bernie Sanders' campaign is fantastic. He's building incredible coalitions in a way that he didn't before, and I think there's a lot that we can learn as the Labour Party from that, not just the energy that's going into that and the passion, but actually you can see drawing on different communities that he wasn't able to draw on before. And I think, therefore, there's a lot to learn from his campaign that we should have back here in the Labour Party so we can build the coalitions that we need going into an election. But don't underestimate the danger to the world if Trump is re-elected this time around.
Thank you. Lisa.
Elizabeth Warren. She knows that America can be a better country. She knows they can have better relations with the rest of us and lift us up across the world. She has a plan to do it, and she knows that it takes a team and it takes a movement. You know, I've never felt hope like it when Barack Obama was elected. When they selected him, when the American media were saying there's no way that an African-American man could ever become president of the United States, and the Democratic Party stepped up and said, yes, he can. And they selected him and they fought for him, and he was elected as the first black president of the United States. Now, we've had our own firsts here in the Labour Party. A few weeks ago, we were in Bristol, a city built on the backs of slavery, where Marvin Rees is now the first democratically elected black mayor in the whole of Europe. But my God, we haven't done well enough on women's advancement. Elizabeth Warren is a strong woman, and it is time.
Thank you. Back to Europe then for our next question, and lots of members want to know about the strategy towards the EU. So the first part of it is, how will you get us back into the EU once you get into power? Or I suppose we should ask, will you get us back into the EU? And if you're not proposing to go back into the EU, what's the plan? What are you planning to do to propose we stay close to the EU with freedom of movement without alienating the Labour voters opposed to immigration? Keir.
Well, the first thing we've got to do as a party, and that includes me, is to accept that the Leave Remain argument is over because we've left the EU. And that has torn us apart. But the next thing we need to do is to recognise we've got a fight on our hands. I didn't vote for Johnson's deal because I feared it would lead to a rupture with Europe, an American-style economy, and that he wouldn't be good on his promises. He just published a white paper this week that showed we were completely right about that. He is going for either no deal or a deal that's so bad it might as well be no deal. And that was why we had the campaign. That's why we voted against it, because I said at the time, stood up at the dispatch box and said, this will end in no deal or close to no deal. And that's exactly where we've gone with it. So we need to take him on in Parliament on this and confront him about that. Rather than arguing about the past, and it's a question for all of us, how are you going to take him on his deal? Because once he's ruptured with Europe, he'll turn to Trump and America, and a deal with America does involve public services. Americans don't do trade deals without public services involved, and it involves a completely different economic model with 10 days holiday, even more inequality, and much less representation for working people. This goes to the heart of the country that we will be, and I'll take him on.
Thank you. Lisa.
I think we've got to acknowledge how badly we got it wrong on Brexit. I fought for a deal after we lost that referendum, having campaigned for Remain in many of those Leave voting areas that have voted Labour for hundreds of years. And I campaigned for a deal because we had a hung parliament and we had a chance of knitting ourselves back together, the political, the economic alliance with Europe that I value so much and that matters to this country. But instead we allowed the Tories to divide us, and we had half the shadow cabinet out arguing for Remain, half arguing for Leave, and we hit that sweet spot in the country where every single person, Leave or Remain, felt deeply insulted and that we weren't standing up for them. We've got to be honest about that, because people will not allow us to put it behind us until we've been clear. And then we've got to go out and we've got to fight, because our future lies with Europe, on climate change, on refugees, on trade, jobs, medical advancement, on all of these things. We need economic cooperation with Europe. So we have got to go out on the front foot and learn the lessons from what we got wrong before. We've got to get out into the country where it is hard, and we've got to win that argument.
Becky.
I think there's two things that we need to do. Firstly, it's so important to make sure that we're breathing down Boris Johnson's neck, to make sure that he gets a trade deal that forges a close collaborative relationship with the European Union. And let's be honest, so far we're not seeing good signs as to this actually happening in practice. In fact, 50,000 form fillers apparently are going to be employed to deal with the blockages that we're going to see at borders. And that's going to have a huge impact on our businesses and industries here in the UK. But what we can't do is spend the next 4 years waiting to tell many of our communities that they got it wrong and now they should change their mind. We've got to show what Britain could look like outside of the European Union by painting that strong vision, showing what our industrial strategy would look like and showing how close we would collaborate with the European Union. We need to fight against the Conservatives' pernicious immigration system that has ended free movement and make sure that we have an immigration system that's rooted in values, not in targets, that ends the hostile environment, that defends the rights of EU citizens here and UK citizens in the European Union, that meets our international obligations on refugees.
Thank you.
And that's our job as an opposition over the next 4 years, to make sure that this government can't divide our communities on issues of immigration as they have done so far.
Thank you. Right, the next question is quite a big one. I'm interested to see where you go with it. Starting with Lisa, please. Patrice would like to know, does capitalism have a future?
Funnily enough, I've been asked this quite a lot during this leadership election. And, you know, a lot of you will know that my dad is a Marxist. So in my family, I'm the one on the right. But I've always believed that there is a problem with the capitalist settlement that we've got. And I've always believed, having the dad that I've got, that from each according to his ability to each according to his need is the right organising principle around which to base society. But I'm a social democrat. I believe that you bring services into public hands and into public ownership so that they work better for everybody. And I was really pleased to see that emphasis in our manifesto. But I think, if I'm honest, it wasn't radical enough. I want to see the railways brought back into public hands, but who really thinks that giving more power to Grant Shapps or, God help us, Chris Grayling is going to sort out the problems on southern or northern railways? We need to get that power out into the country. I want to see us liberalise data, the world's most powerful commodity, so that it's used for public good, not for private gain. And I want to see us decentralise the energy system, so that those energy networks across the country are being owned and run by communities and by councils, so that we're breaking up the dominance of the big six and tackling climate change. I think there is a future-looking agenda that we can forge as socialists in the 21st century. That is what I'll go out and fight for.
Thank you. Becky.
Yes, capitalism does have a future, but it's democratic socialism that should be underpinning all of our policies. And that means recognising that we've got the most regionally unequal country in the whole of Europe, as I said earlier, and we've got structural flaws in our economy that if we don't address very quickly, we will see an exacerbation in inequality over the next 30 years. And that requires shifting power and wealth into the hands of those who truly create wealth. It means broadening representation of trade unions in our workplaces. It means looking at alternative models of ownership, cooperatives, public ownership of key utilities to make sure that they act in our interest, not in the interest of shareholders who want to extract profit against investing in critical infrastructure. And it means not being afraid of investing in the building blocks of aspiration, our public services, our educational system, social care, NHS, our local councils, and having them there to realise every single person within our community's aspirations.
Thank you. Here.
We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and the economy just isn't working for people. There are so many examples of this. Homelessness. Just look at what's happened in the last 10 years or so. You can see it here in Brighton. In my children's school, they did a project on homelessness. And when I went in, there was a profound feeling, which I hadn't expected, which is every child in that primary school thought homelessness was normal. They thought it was normal to walk past someone in the street on their way to school. That's the moral disgrace of our economy. It's a moral disgrace. And whilst I'm on the question of moral disgrace and how our economy is not working, our mental health service is so badly funded that if you're an 8-year-old, you have to wait 18 months for an assessment, even for autism. How can that be right in 21st century Britain? An 8-year-old waiting for that assessment before they can even get any support. And then you may have seen the report last week on life expectancy, particularly after the last 10 years. 21st century Britain and life expectancy going down in some areas, When the history books are written in 20 or 30 years, they're going to look around and say, what was going on in that wealthy country that allowed that to happen? And the inequality, it's not just going down, the inequalities between those areas that are well off or not. So on the economy, on this critical question, we've got to have the courage to say the economic model we've got is busted, it's not delivering, and we've got to change it for a different economic model.
Thank you. The next set of questions come from quite a few members who would like to know about climate change and the idea of a Green New Deal. Starting with Keir, let's take Annie's question. She says, given the importance and severity of the climate crisis, can you outline your commitments to a decarbonisation target, and would that be in 2030?
Well, this is the number one issue of our time, climate change, the climate emergency, and we're coming to it late. There's lots of things we should have done that we haven't done. And we need to recognise this is a global issue, not something we can solve just in the United Kingdom. And one of the things I'd want to do as leader of our party and as a Labour Prime Minister is to strengthen the international agreements. I was really pleased to see that court judgment on Heathrow this week, not just because of the decision, but it's the first time the Paris Agreement has been used in any court to good effect. I've been saying that agreement needs to be strengthened. I'm really pleased that in that judgment our courts have said, actually this matters significantly, so much so that the expansion of an airport can't go ahead. As for the decarbonisation, critically important. We did commit to 2030, quite rightly. I think we've got to be honest enough to say that we have now lost 5 years, at least nationally, in achieving that, because we lost that election. But there is stuff going on locally that we can do. Local authorities are doing a lot of work and we should support them. Whatever we can do towards that target, we should. But if we really, really want to change this, we've got to win an election and get in and do something about it.
Thank you. Lisa.
Well, I agree with Keir. I mean, we've just lost a general election, and while we've been arguing about whether we can meet our climate change commitments by 2030, the government isn't even on track to meet the commitment that we've got to 2050. So we've got to get out there and start taking this fight to them. There are things we can do now. We may not be in power, but we should never believe that we're powerless. We can go out and fight, especially in those areas where we are in power, in Wales and in the towns and cities across the country, for a bus network to be decarbonised and go to net zero by 2024. That is inherently possible, and we should be fighting for that. When I was the Shadow Energy and Climate Change Secretary, I was proud to work with 60 Labour councils across the country to see how they were using the power of the Thames and wind turbines and solar farms right across this country in order to power clean energy and to cut 15% off the UK's carbon footprint, even at a time when the Tories were taking us backwards. We've got to go out and tell those stories about the difference Labour makes, and we should be holding Boris Johnson to account on his inaction on this. We should not be signing trade deals with countries like the US that do not sign up to the Paris Agreement. Let's use the leverage that we have to raise standards up and set us on a path to carbon safety.
Becky.
2030 is so important because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have said that even just to reach net zero by 2050, we have to take the majority of the action by 2030. And that's why in this election we went in with a policy platform of 30 actions required by 2030, a detailed programme put together by trade unions and industry experts as to what was technologically possible. It was our NHS moment. It didn't just tackle climate change. Here in the South East, it would have created 110,000 high-skilled jobs with £19 billion worth of public investment. It would have expanded Southampton Port and upgraded its fabrication yard to avail of the industries of the future and build the wind farms here. It would have upgraded almost every single home in this area to a standard that eliminated fuel poverty and brought people's bills down. And it would have rolled out a council house building programme of 24,000 a year by the end of the first Parliament. It was a huge economic lever. But we have to recognise we didn't win the election.
Thank you.
But that target should still be there. And we have to build a movement outside of the Labour Party, from businesses to trade unions, to pressure the government to take the action that's necessary, because we won't have a world to hand on to our children if we don't do this. It's that important.
Thank you. So a quick follow-up thanks to Felix. He is asking, how did all the candidates travel to Brighton today?
Lots of trains from Wigan.
Becky?
Lots of trains as well.
Oh, you're all so good.
What happened to Shanty's pony?
Around the corner.
Okay, on to our next question. Lisa's going to begin with this one. We had several around this theme. Sally would like to ask, I'm not just voting for the next leader of the Labour Party, but also for the next Prime Minister in 4 years' time. What qualities do you personally have that would help you in that role?
I'm genuinely non-factional. I come from the left of the party, but I used to work for a campaign group MP who was fighting against the Iraq war. But when I was elected to Parliament, I was sought out by Tessa Jowell and asked to be her PPS on the Olympics project. From both Neil Gerard, the MP I worked for, and from Tessa Jowell, I learnt that you learn more by having people in the room who are prepared to challenge you and who are prepared to tell you when you're getting things wrong. And that is the party that I believe in, and that is the broad team I'll build in order to take us back to government. I've spent my entire life doing things that probably you wouldn't do if you were trying to become leader of the Labour Party. I spent my time before I came into Parliament working with child refugees, trying to get Yarlswood closed down, taking the last Labour government to court over their destitution policies, challenging them over the way they were treating homeless teenagers when I worked for the charity Centrepoint. I fought against free schools and academies as a new MP, which brought me into contact with Dominic Cummings, where I got him thrown out the Department for Education. It pitted me against my own party over and over again. But that is my commitment to you, that I go to where it is hard and I fight the fights that need to be fought. That is what this country needs. That is the spirit that Labour needs to recover. And I promise you that that is what I'll do.
Thank you. Becky?
Well, look, there are two things that a leader needs to win the next general election. The first is to be electable, to appeal to a cross-section of society. And the second is they have to have a vision and a plan to get us into power. Because one without the other won't hand us the keys to number 10. So that's why I am forensic. I am detailed. I do understand why we lost this general election, and I resonate with many of those votes that we lost in our heartlands right across the country. But more importantly, I have a plan. I have a vision that I've not just worked on in this campaign. I've been working on it since I came into Parliament. A plan that will deliver aspiration to our communities, a plan that will roll out a green industrial revolution that will create the jobs of the future, a plan that will empower our members and make sure they are respected and they have a voice at every single step of our policy making process, and a plan that provides a democratic revolution to shift power and wealth into the hands of our communities and not to keep it in the hands of Westminster.
Thank you. And here.
In order to get from where we are now to where we need to do three things. We need to unite as a party and pull together. And so the question, it's really your question rather than our question, is who's the candidate that can actually pull this party together as a team that can fight together into the next general election? And I've got a history of building teams, running big organisations, bringing people together and getting them behind me as we go forward. The second thing is we've got to be a very effective opposition. And if we think we've got a bit of time now to think about this till 2024, we're completely wrong. The fight is on now. And so the second question for all of you, again, it's your decision, is who's going to be the most effective opposition and absolutely take it to Johnson and demonstrate day in, day out to the public that he's not to be trusted, because we have to persuade people to vote for us, and they'll only do that if they can see him being taken apart in Parliament, out of Parliament across the country, on the airwaves, etc. And then we have to be absolutely unrelentingly focused on winning that next general election, because if we don't win that election, and we win it with values, I completely agree with that, but if we don't win that next general election, then you won't be seeing a Labour Prime Minister. We desperately need a Labour Prime Minister, a Labour government that can radically change our country.
Thank you. We're coming close to the end. I'm going to have one last question, which is a fun question, before you do your 2-minute closing statements. It comes from Fiona in Brighton, and it's themed around desert island discs. She would like to know, if you were on desert island discs, what would be your choice of music, your book, assuming you're already taking Shakespeare and the Bible, and your luxury item? I think we're starting with Becky for this one.
Oh, luxury. I've got too many luxury items.
You're only allowed one.
Probably hair straighteners, but I'd need to have some like electrical source because I've got curly hair in real life, you see, and on a desert island it would go like completely mad. In terms of a song, now this is probably going to surprise everybody, but I'll probably have Everybody Is in the Place by The Prodigy, so that while I was on my own, at least I could dance around and be a bit happy.
I did a version of this in our constituency, and what you think you're going to say is completely different to what. In the end, for my records, my discs, I actually chose things that reminded me of important things in my life. So my mum particularly liked Jim Reeves, so my first one up was Jim Reeves, which was a bit of a shock to the room. My favourite, but because when you think you're going to choose your 8 favourite records or discs, but you don't actually, because you want them to reflect different things. And I thought about the records that we have been bringing up our children to, etc. But Edwyn Collins has always been my favourite, and so I'm going to stick with him. On what luxury item, I'm going to take a football, although on your own on a desert island, that may not be so much use, but I'm mad about football, and I couldn't be there without a football. And as for the book, Good Enough Mother by Bev Thomas, if you haven't read it, it's really, really fantastic. Up-and-coming author. So that's what I'd take to my desert island.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa.
So the song would obviously be Toxic by Britney Spears, which is the most perfect piece of pop music ever written. And I was asked the other day if Britney was my guilty pleasure, and I was so deeply offended by Nick Robinson, who asked me that. Guilty pleasure? There's nothing to feel guilty about. The book would probably be The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell, because it would remind me of home, and it would also remind me of just what the Tories have done to this country, unravelling so much of the progress that we've made, and how big a fight we will have on our hands when I finally manage to get off the desert island and come back and join these two and take the fight to the Tories. And the luxury item I think I'd take would be a train set, because I'm known for my love of buses, but I've got a 4-year-old as well, and I'm not getting stuck on a desert island with him without some toys, so train set is a must.
Thank you. Let's just hope you're not basing this on musical choices. Okay, that's it for your questions. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if your question didn't get picked. I did try and cover as many as possible. We're going to move on to closing statements. Each candidate has 2 minutes each. I think we're going to start with Keir Starmer.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for your questions. I hope you've seen them answered. We've had many, many hustings and many, many questions, and that's the way it should be in an election campaign like this. But there's one burning question, which is how do we get from where we are to winning the next general election? That's the question that matters above all else, because that general election loss in December was devastating. Devastating for our MPs, brilliant MPs who didn't make it back, devastating for candidates who should be with us as part of our Labour team, but devastating above all else for the millions of people, and I mean millions of people, who desperately needed change in that general election after 10 years of Tory rule and are not now going to get it. And we've lost 4 general elections in a row. 4 in a row. If we lose the next one, which is probably 2024, the Labour Party, our party, will have been out of power for longer than at any other time since the Second World War. Now, I came into politics to change lives for millions of people. I think that's why you're all involved in politics, why our movement is our movement, to change millions of lives. And you don't do that in opposition. You do not do that in opposition. You've heard the policy differences that we have on various issues. Most of the answers we've given you will be very hard to implement if we're not in power. Let's be honest about it. You may like what you've heard from one candidate or another. If we don't win, probably it won't happen. So we've got to focus, and we've got a choice as a party. We can mope about, head in hands, argue with each other, take lumps out of each other, be factional. We practice that a lot, and we're pretty good at it. And we'll lose. or we can pull together. We can say this is the moment to unite and rebuild, pull together over the next 4 years, recognise that this 4 years, this next leg of the journey, is for us. Labour governments don't come from nowhere. They come when our party and our movement pulls together and says it's our duty and responsibility to change our party, our movement and our country. And that's why I want to be leader of our party.
Lisa Nandy.
Here in Brighton, over a century ago, a young shop girl, Margaret Bondfield, was so angered by what she found that it led her to found a trade union, later to become the GMB, transform working conditions and smash the glass ceiling as our first female cabinet minister for Labour. Hers was a generation of women for whom Labour was the key to change and who were key to changing Labour. Like Mary Barber, the Glaswegian, who led the government rent strikes and marched 20,000 people down to the town hall to stop one family's eviction. Barbara Castle once said, in politics, guts is all. Never forget it. It's been 120 years, but can we still say that we're advancing? That's why after our worst election defeat since 1935, now is not the time to play it safe. That was a country where poverty, unemployment and rampant inequality had spread like a disease. More of the same would not do. Change had to come. The moment was then. That moment is now. A country desperate for change will not respond to a low-energy, low-risk campaign. It will not forgive a party that offers more of the same. The planet is burning, the country is underwater, the air we breathe, the water we drink, our legacy to future generations is at stake. The urgency of our time calls us forward to channel the courage and determination of the women who've gone before. Our fight is to create the world as it should be, not just challenge the world as it is. When an Indian woman, Jayabin Desai, led the Grunit workers out on strike before I was born, changing the way women like me were seen in this movement and this country, she showed a nation in despair that through the strength of our common endeavour, change becomes inevitable. She told the managers, we are lions. In this moment, this is the spirit the country needs. That's why I'm asking you to support me for that challenge. We can win, but only with the courage to try. This is the moment. Now is the time that we roar.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Well, look, it's really nice to be here in Brighton, a vibrant and inclusive city, but sadly here, the reality of our economy is laid bare. For too many, pay is too low, work is too insecure, bills are too high, housing too expensive, and too few jobs are rewarding. We see the homelessness crisis in this local community and so many others across the country, a crisis this government isn't interested in facing. But the solution to these ills and to put Labour into power, it's not to retreat and it's not to despair. We have to offer people hope, hope that they can make their lives better, hope that they can believe in, and hope that we will deliver that. So my plan is based on aspirational socialism, a green industrial revolution, empowering our movement, and a democratic revolution. That is our path to power. And to win again, we need to be part of the social fabric of our communities again. And that's why, under my leadership, Labour will back workers in every dispute and strike against unfair and exploitative employers. We'll launch a mass trade union membership drive supporting hundreds of thousands of young activists who've been inspired by our party to become active trade unionists in their workplace. Because power won't just be won in Westminster, it will be won by us rebuilding our movement and uniting all of our heartlands, from Brixton to Blythe to Brighton, with members and trade unionists alike. Now, I realise where we got things wrong, but more importantly, I've got the solutions. We forge our path to power, not by weakening our ambitions, but by realising them. Solidarity.
And that's it from the leadership candidates. Let's give them a big round of applause again.